Hello and welcome to episode 23 of the Nostalgia Bubble podcast, the show where two lifelong best friends celebrate the movies that they love. I'm your host Shuggie, an amateur film reviewer and nerd.
And I am Nai, the haiku to Shuggie's Chihiro.
Hey, I think I'd go with the pronunciation Haku.
Haku, okay.
And yeah.
Having just watched the film. I think that segues nicely. So
yeah, we're doing Spirited Away.
Which is one of your favourite films.
Yeah, this was the first Studio Ghibli film I ever saw, or Studio Ghibli. I'm not sure the correct pronunciation there, so we're gonna get pronunciations bad this episode. Let's be honest. So this was the first one I ever saw, and I kind of just immediately fell in love with this kind of weird fantasy world, but just like real heart at the centre of it. And I've since gone on. I've watched a lot of the Ghibli films, specifically a lot of the Hayao Miyazaki films, because I think he's just a genius. And yeah, I have watched a significant amount of Japanese animated films. I have not dived into the world of anime, referring to kind of the long form series that they do, like the 600,000 episodes of Naruto or whatever. But I do love kind of Japanese anime films.
Yeah.
What about you, Now? Have you actually watched? Is this your first experience of?
I think it might be, yeah.
Yeah.
And I actually, before kind of answering your question and sort of going into what I thought of the film, the one question that really struck me was I wanted to know what made it your favourite film. Because it is mad. Like the film itself is crazy. And yeah, I was just so intrigued to hear what made it your favourite film, or one of your favourite films.
So there's definitely nostalgia in there. It's kind of it was my gateway drug, if you will, into the world of Studio Ghibli. Yeah. I think Chihiro/Sen is just this amazing character, like just a brilliant coming of age journey from this like meek, terrified of kind of being exposed to so much new.
Yeah.
And the growth that she goes on. I'm a great lover of fantasy, and you give me weird fantasy stuff and I am in, and I'm sure we'll get to something like Pan's Labyrinth at some point, but just kind of dark, weird fantasy, this delivers in spades. I love all the kind of spirit designs. You got things like No Face is just amazing, and just incredible sequences like the river spirit sequence and all of that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. For me, the immediate thing, I'm sure we'll get into some post production in a sec, but for me, I got a sort of anime version of Alice in Wonderland.
100% kind of influences of Alice in Wonderland or Wizard of Oz in there.
Yeah, and I think that the one thing that really struck me straight away was the design and the animation, and it was almost mesmerizing. Even just the opening scene where they're driving into this new village or this new town, and because I mean it's probably just because I haven't watched much anime stuff before. Well, I haven't watched any really. That
it's just Pokemon kind of the first movie.
Yeah, I haven't watched any since I was about 7 then.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of absolutely struck by how beautiful it was. I was experiencing it for the first time, and it was just really beautiful and easy to watch. And I think I probably spent the first until they kind of went through the archway, and for that kind of first sort of 10-15 minutes, I was just sitting there kind of admiring how beautifully created it was.
Yeah, and then you get into how beautifully creative it is as the kind of spirit world comes to life.
Yeah. And I had things that I wasn't as keen on.
Okay.
And things that I really enjoyed. Things that I had a really kind of fun time with. So
great. I'm sure we'll get into breaking those down, and I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, I agree on like how visually beautiful it is. I know specifically like the Studio Ghibli films are such a high watermark. Yeah, they kind of very traditional in the way they do animation. They tend to do a lot more kind of hand-drawn animation, kind of like old school Disney, which Disney have switched over to being kind of computer-generated animation, whereas they still hand-draw a lot of this. This was kind of one of the first ones that they touched on kind of computer animation, and we'll get into that in a minute, because let's do some pre-production.
Okay.
So kind of the original idea for Spirited Away kind of came from Miyazaki's desire to make a film for some childhood friends. So it's basically these 5 girls who would spend the summer on holiday with him and his family in a cabin in the mountains. Mm-hmm. And he was like, I've made a lot of kid films, but I haven't really made anything that, a young girl essentially can look up to and fall in love with as well. So he tried reading this thing called shoujo manga, which is basically a genre of comic essentially aimed at teen female readership. But he was like, all this does is focus on romance and teenage crushes, and that's not like what my friends were, that's not what they really cared about. So he wanted to, create a heroine that they could really look up to.
Yeah.
So he pitched a few films to Studio Ghibli, and they were rejected. And this was kind of the third proposal he came up with. He always wanted it to kind of revolve around a bathhouse, because he was inspired by kind of this one he had in his hometown that was, like, he always kind of thought was really mysterious. And kind of that plays into the whole Chihiro thrown into this bizarre world that she doesn't understand.
Yeah.
There was Walt Disney actually helped finance 10% of the production budget for the right of first refusal for US distribution, which is then something that they would go on to actually produce the English dub.
Oh, okay.
And as I kind of mentioned earlier, this was the first time that Ghibli staff kind of experimented with computer animation, which they were kind of using to enhance the story without stealing the show, if you will.
Yeah.
Most of the characters in it are still like hand-drawn, kind of more traditional animation, and there was still very much a focus on that. One of the really kind of cool things Miyazaki would do he'd visit like architectural museums for inspiration for the buildings, and specifically Eido Tokyo Open Air Architectural Museum, which he said just kind of made him feel really nostalgic, especially near closing time in the evening as the sun's setting, and that kind of really gives you that first scene where they're coming into the spirit world, and as the sun sets and everything kind of starts to come to life, like you can just imagine him sitting there and at this museum and really starting to picture that in his mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of all I've got. So
nice.
Let's dive into the film.
Yeah, straight in.
Yeah. Obviously, we learn immediately Chihiro, her family are moving. She's upset, and her dad takes a wrong turn. These are very kind of stereotypical, like from my experience, anime parents. I don't know if this goes true for like a lot of anime shows, but these kind of very gruff, just bulldozing ahead dad is, because it seems very typical to me.
Yeah. I was waiting for him to learn his lesson.
Oh no.
And they set up a not really nice contrast, I think, with Chihiro and help sort of prop her up for that arc that she kind of goes through the film.
Yeah, I see. I think kind of they seem to me kind of very traditional kind of parents. Obviously, Japan, a very traditional country. I'm not an expert in Japanese culture anyway, but you could definitely imagine that those kind of domestic roles still kind of hold true in a lot of families, and particularly back in like 2000 when this was made. So, I mean, I don't want to make assumptions, but I could see that definitely being the case. So, it was interesting you said the thing about you keep waiting for them to learn their lesson, but I guess there's not kind of a lesson maybe to be learnt for Japanese people. These are just kind of expected normal parents. And I think...
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
I think what we're kind of meant to take from this opening scene is how afraid of going with them Chihiro is. Like, she is constantly, no, can we stay at the car? Stop doing that. Don't go do this. I think that's kind of the point of this opening scene, is Chihiro is incredibly afraid of what's going on, of these kind of new experiences, of being thrown into something she doesn't know and isn't comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean that's I think that's kind of what I meant by they sort of feed into the start line, or what kind of represents the start line for Chihiro and her growth through the film. I think they are there to challenge her so that timidness is accentuated.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. And I do like the fact that kind of as they start eating this food, like even before the full turn into pigs happens, you can kind of tell just from the noises they're making, like they're getting more animalistic.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was actually something that I really enjoyed about the film was the sounds, the sound effects that they used in the film. And but yes, they were immediate. Yeah, you could tell that something was coming.
Yeah. And Chihiro, she runs off, and so the bit that so first she encounters Haku, who tells her she needs to get back across the river because it's nearly night, and we see kind of spirits starting to appear. But it's when after she sees her parents are pigs, and she runs back to the river, and it's like a full, lake almost. That's where she starts shouting that she's dreaming and kind of needs to wake up. That's where it's kind of really hit home for me. There is a lot of Alice in Wonderland or Wizard of Oz influence here.
Yeah, it felt like there were kind of a lot of moving parts that she didn't have control over.
Oh, yeah.
And I wouldn't necessarily say I immediately associated it with, but I think I kind of had a similar experience when I first watched Harry Potter, and you see that the stairways have changed. And that kind of constant adjustment of her surroundings, and there was just something really disjointed about the whole place. And obviously you get the distance that's been sort of drawn between her and the other side of the river obviously isolates her straight away. But yeah, I really liked, so the opening section of the film was probably my favourite sequence.
Interesting.
I really enjoyed that kind of subversion of, like, as the sun goes down, everybody else comes to life, and seeing that sort of that gradually kind of become the case as you see the lanterns turn on, and you see these spirits kind of just come up out of nowhere, and it's almost like this whole different. And I got a little bit of, I mean, when we were talking about Hellboy, that sort of the market behind the wall, and that idea that there's this whole other world, just like it's right within touching distance, but you can't see it.
It's a very apt comparison, because I talked about how much I love that kind of sequence, and you can kind of see how my love of that kind of stuff definitely originated here and spirited away.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I just really enjoyed that whole sequence. And yeah, I thought that it was kind of really brilliantly done, and again the design was great.
Yeah. And she kind of starts to fade in this spirit world until Haku is able to find her and get her a berry, because you need to eat something to remain in the spirit world, apparently. And then we kind of get into this sequence of her trying to get into the bathhouse. First off, we have this is very anime, where Haku's like running through the people with her.
Yes.
This is like, I've just I'll get into a little bit more later, but I've just been watching Demon Slayer, which is an anime show. It's the first anime show that I've ever watched that isn't Pokemon, to call back to an earlier joke. And yeah, like this kind of very low kind of glide running almost is something that I think seems to be common in anime.
Yeah, it did seem very traditional. I mean, having only seen Pokemon, obviously my experience of anime is completely limited, and I think that's probably going to be the case all the way through this film,
Yeah.
but or this analysis. But yeah, I think it did. This did feel very much like watching Pokemon, and it's it's probably not a particularly accurate comparison, but it is. I guess it is a comment on the conventions of anime.
Yeah, I don't think Pokemon ever hits the depth of storytelling we get in Spirited Away. Yeah, and I it's something, it's a kind of a world that I am starting to explore, but I wish, the one thing I wish I need to look more into is kind of the world of Japanese folklore. Because obviously, a classicist, I love kind of mythology and folklore and stuff. And yeah, I don't know much about kind of. I know that kami are like the kind of main Japanese spirits that people know about, and that's kind of an inspiration of a lot of the spirits that we see kind of going on here. And yeah, I'd love to explore more about this kind of world, because I know Miyazaki took a lot of influence from Japanese folklore in kind of the designs that he was making here.
Yeah, I mean, my knowledge of Japanese folklore is absolutely nothing, but you can definitely tell that this is rooted in a lot of tradition.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I think, a thing that Studio Ghibli do quite a bit. And I know that they've done some movies, that are based on like English books or Western books, and they have adapted them with a kind of very traditional Japanese style. Often, they add in a lot of kind of issues, Japanese kind of political issues. I know this one touches on kind of environmentalism at times. It touches on kind of commercialism. And, we talk about kind of the influence of things like Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, and then to kind of take those and then completely transport them to ground them in a kind of traditional Japanese, setting is a really cool way of doing it.
Yeah, I think something is, I mean, Alice in Wonderland has been a real staple of kids' culture.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always known about it, and it's been around way before I was born, and I think to be able to recreate that, and to merge it, but also like it doesn't lose any sense of wonder.
Yeah.
It doesn't lose any sense of that that kind of madness and that sort of awe that comes with those sort of stories. And there's something really magical about it, and especially when somebody who's come at this completely unfamiliar with it, to still sort of experience that aspect of it. And I guess that's sort of the experience you had as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why I love fantasy, is you can take these kind of well-worn stories and make them interesting through just incredible new settings. It just means that even though if you know kind of the story, you can make something completely unique with it. At which point we get a lot of information thrown at both us and Chihiro very quickly.
Yes.
Is this kind of one of the areas where maybe you struggled because there's so much information coming at you?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. The only issue with this was that, and maybe this means I need a second watch, I need to rewatch it. I felt that because there was so much information, that there were points where, and because I wasn't able to process it all, because I was also still trying to figure out what this world was and what was going on to her and what had happened to her parents, I think that almost stunted my ability to understand bits of it going forward.
Okay.
Not entirely. Like I still got the plot. It didn't feel like I was watching it didn't feel like I was watching a David Lynch film by the end of it. But it was made a little bit tougher, I think, because I was kind of calculating as I was going through some of it.
So here's what I can say. I can completely understand where you're coming from, because watching this as, a 6-7-year-old kid, whatever it was when I saw it, I probably didn't know, like, kind of what was going on fully.
I am 26, though.
But with, the mental intellect of maybe an 8-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm still stuck on Pokemon.
Exactly.
That's why.
I mean, hey, I'm the one who still plays Pokemon religiously.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So I definitely kind of as a kid wasn't, following the story kind of exactly what was going on, and it was probably not until even when I remember at my secondary school we had a great teacher who used to put on like a kind of lunchtime film club, and she showed Spirited Away over a few lunchtimes, and I dived back in, loved this film. And even then, like, I probably didn't follow kind of all the ins and outs. It wasn't until watching it more recently that I was like, okay, yeah, I understand what's going on. And that would be with 2 or 3 watches under my belt.
Yeah, I mean, I generally understood who was who and the roles that they played, and I understood I kind of understood what Chihiro had to do. Like, I figured, I knew that she basically had to stay in the spirit world long enough to be able to save her parents.
Yeah.
But it was, there was just a couple of little things that I was like, I don't understand this.
Yeah,
I think Haku, I think he was always meant to be a bit of an ambiguous character. He was always meant to be quite kind of, you don't know what he does, or, there's that sort of, everybody wants his attention, everybody's kind of admiring of him, and you don't really know why. All you know is that he seems to be a good person. And I think, and obviously, even he's going on his own journey of self-discovery through this film, so maybe it's meant to be that way, that you don't understand him fully. But yeah, I don't know if I kind of missed it, or I just didn't really get that connection between like him being the dragon and being his human form.
Okay. Yeah. No. There was a moment. I think it's where he takes her to see her parents in pig form, and where she's going back, and then sees the dragon flying off from where he was.
Right. Okay.
So I think there is a moment in there, but also there's kind of little moments. So there's kind of the discussion with Lin, where she asks about Haku, and Lin says, he's just your barber's like henchman, basically. Don't trust anything he says, and kind of we get that he's very different with Chihiro than with anyone else. And there's kind of that really good scene where they first, where after she gets her job, and Haku has to take her down, and he's suddenly acting very cold towards her, and he's in charge, and you have to call me master, and it's like, okay, this is how he is with everyone else. And there's something special about Chihiro, but we don't know what it is. He doesn't know what it is. And we're going to discover that along with both of these characters.
Yeah. I mean, I did understand that, he was genuinely trying to protect her. I understood that there was a difference between Chihiro and the rest of the spirit world and the way that Haku related to them. But yeah, I think I maybe just kind of missed a couple of little details.
Yeah, which, again, because you're having so much information thrown at you, and I think you don't know what's important at this point. Like, if you're watching it for the first time, you're being told, you have to avoid your barber. You're going, who's your barber? Why am I having to avoid her? You need to go down to the boiler room and talk to Komanji and get a job and all of this. And you're being introduced to all these, like, major characters very, very quickly. And, you get bits where kind of it's explained later in slightly more detail about who some of these people are. But
Yeah.
if you've been focusing on it before, where you're not getting the answers, then yeah, I can absolutely see how you miss little details. I really like this kind of scene as Chihiro makes her way down to the boiler room, where she's really timid on the stairs, and it's like
Yeah.
so scared because they're completely open and exposed on the side of it. And then when you compare it with the scene later in the film, where she's trying to get up to Yubaba's office and she's climbing up the side of the bathhouse and you're running across this loose pipe, and it's like
Yeah.
it's a great way of just showing the growth. Like, you don't need someone spelling out, oh my god, you've got so much, tougher and more resilient. It's just like these two moments of contrast in these scenes.
I thought that what this film did a lot was, I mean, I've already said how I thought its strength was its kind of cinematography and its design and stuff, and I really think that it didn't just use that as a backdrop, it used it to sort of facilitate the story as well, which I think is a great, especially when you've got something that is so sort of blatantly aesthetic as animation,
Yeah.
I think if you want to make a good animation film, you have to use the animation, you have to use the kind of design to push the story as well, and I think that they did do this really well. And you can, I mean, from the get-go, from that kind of that point where she goes back to the river and it's a lake, and then the point where you see the parents transform, like, none of this stuff is really explained, but they've used the animation and they've used the design in order to kind of make it almost self-explanatory.
Yeah, I mean, and Studio Ghibli are masters of this. They're not someone who's gonna, dump out pages of exposition for you. They're gonna do show don't tell, and and you're gonna have to kind of work these things out for yourself often. And then she makes her way into the bathhouse for the first time, and we get to meet Komanji, and he doesn't have a job for her because he's got this small army of soot sprites working for him who are so cute.
They are cute, very cute. When they just kind of drop the rocks.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because one of them is struggling, so she helps it, and then they're all just like, "Do all of our jobs for us." But then also when Komanji's like telling her, get out, I don't have anything for you, and they all kind of huddle up and protect her.
Yeah.
Like they instantly take a liking to it. They're adorable.
I mean, the way that you've sort of described them now has kind of made, I knew they were cute, but I didn't really understand their personality until you've sort of explained it and broken it down like that.
Oh, right.
I kind of, that sort of protectiveness of her, and that, I hadn't really read into it like that. So that's a nice interpretation of it. So yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of how I've always read it. And they see her help one of their own, so they immediately all take a liking to her. Is kind of how I interpret it.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's kind of just, more than anything, it's just a sign of things to come in the film. Like, Chihiro spends the whole film being one of the most selfless characters I've ever seen.
Yeah.
She's the film is basically her trying to stay there long enough to be able to save her parents, but then along the way she genuinely ends up wanting to help others. She gets completely sidetracked by trying to save Haku, and then trying to kind of sort of save the baby, and like Yubaba's baby, and she is genuinely one of the most selfless characters I think we've had all season.
Yeah, and I like the fact that there is clearly immediately you get the feeling there is a dislike of humans in the spirit world. They're all immediately disgusted by her. But she, as you say, is so selfless and just such a wonderful person that she gets people over to her side. Like, you have Komanji, 1 minute being like, get out, there's no work here. And then as soon as Lin comes in, he's like, oh, she's my granddaughter, get her a job.
Yeah.
Komanji suddenly acting kind of quite paternal towards her. And you see it again when she comes down and sleeps there, and he's, covering her with the blanket and stuff. Like, she just draws out the goodness in people in what is not a good place.
Yeah, and what I find quite interesting, No Face almost becomes kind of like her guardian angel at one point, and I find that is kind of what's really nice is that she has that sort of dynamic with the other people that she kind of or the other spirits that she encounters, and there's sort of this really nice little balance between them where, they're spirits, but she's the one that's kind of bringing the best out of them.
Yeah, and I think this is a good time to kind of get into the bathhouse as a whole, where like this is a place, and I think it comes from Yobaba down, that is driven by greed. Everyone, as soon as the river spirit drops that gold, they're all kind of rushing in to try and get it, and Yobaba's like, this is all mine. And No Face picks up on that, and kind of No Face is very quickly kind of corrupted by the bathhouse. By he plays on the greed of the workers, and he becomes greedy himself. He's there demanding more and more food, and kind of Chihiro's the only one who, she's so selfless, as you say, that it is such a contrast to everyone else in this place. And she's the only one who kind of rallies against that almost.
Yeah, that's a really nice kind of analysis of it. I think that kind of contrast between her and the rest of the spirit world is very quickly apparent. But I really liked the way that it was accentuated in the bathhouse. I really liked the scene where she's having to wash the river spirit.
Yeah.
The responsibility is placed on her. And even then she ends up kind of doing good. She's not kind of doing a chore. She ends up helping this river spirit, and like I think what's really nice is that it does just seem so like effortless for her. It is second nature to her.
Yeah, for everyone else, they think it's a stink spirit. They don't want to deal with it. They're pawning it off on her as a punishment for being this new human. And even when she's actually doing it and using kind of the tags that let her get like the scented water and stuff, they're like, why are you wasting it on this? They're all kind of very cruel and dismissive, and she's like, no, I'm going to do this job, and then when she realizes something wrong, I'm going to help. And as I say, I think there's definitely, the bathhouse is in some way meant to kind of represent the greed of capitalism and stuff like that. It's definitely meant to represent kind of a commercialism, capitalism, this kind of Western ideology of make money at all costs. And I like kind of the way that's almost like corrupting this kind of traditional Japanese. We talked about it being this traditional folklore and stuff, and this almost Western ideology coming and corrupting it, I think, is definitely something that Miyazaki's commenting on, and definitely has little bits to say on kind of the impact on not just people but on the environment as well. Like, obviously we have the river spirit, who is basically blocked up with all this stuff that has been discarded. Bike, there's like TV or microwave in there's all this stuff. And at the end, kind of when we learn about Haku and him being the spirit of the Kotaku River, and he can't ever find his way home because the river's been destroyed, like dried up, and houses built on it.
Yeah, there was definitely kind of quite a strong or a poignant point about economic development and that disregard for, the world,
Yeah.
and the sort of natural world. I mean, there was I thought that the river spirit scene in the bathhouse was kind of a really clear depiction of it, and then obviously that got really summed up by this sort of revelation that Haku was the spirit of the Kotaku River. So that's I think that felt like a really sort of a common theme throughout.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely, and it's definitely a common theme throughout kind of Ghibli and specifically Miyazaki's work. Princess Mononoke is a film very much about that, and the impact people have on the environment. And if you haven't seen, I think this should be your entry point into the world of Studio Ghibli, specifically the work of Hayao Miyazaki. Princess
I've still got to watch
Mononoke.
Firefly first.
Yeah, but Princess Mononoke is one that you should absolutely watch. It's stunning. Yeah. So Chihiro, she manages to get herself a job. She keeps Yubaba tries to turn her away and throwing all these threats at her, but she keeps insisting, "No, I want a job. Give me a job." And she signs her name away, which this is like a really interesting thing. Like, she literally signs away the name Chihiro to the point that she starts forgetting it and is renamed Sen. I know kind of like this idea of having power in names is not like unique to this. I know it comes it goes back to old folklore. Definitely things like Rumpelstiltskin, stuff like that. But this is going to be a really cool way where Yubaba owns her because she owns her name.
Yeah. I feel like there's this kind of question of identity for her the whole way through. I mean, first and foremost, she starts fading. And if that's not kind of a visual representation, then I don't know what is.
Yeah.
But there's this sort of, and I guess it's more than just about her sense of identity, but also, sense of self and confidence. And I think there is, without sounding too cliche, it is a story of her trying to kind of find herself, and you see that growth through it. And I think part of that is accentuated by this sort of loss of this pivotal, like monumental thing, which is her name.
Mm-hmm.
She almost has to have her identity completely stripped back before she can sort of grow into this whole new thing. And it's like this transformation, and you see this through the film in so many different characters in different ways, like this transformation from one thing to another, this sort of change of state. And whether that is kind of reflective of this lack of control, you've got characters changing in so many different ways. You've got the environment changing in so many different ways. There's like, it seems to be this sort of ever-growing space and setting and environment, with even the characters are not one fixed thing. And like her parents, for example, and so with all these moving parts, and even Shihiro's character arc is all about her change and her growth. I think the signing away of the name is sort of almost bringing her back to square one, kind of creating a blank canvas, and that kind of gives her the platform or the sort of the springboard to create this new character that she becomes.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool interpretation of it. I like that a lot. I also think that there is definitely kind of this idea of like the power of names that goes back to it's very kind of traditional, going back to like Egyptian mythology and references to similar kind of stuff in the Bible, but it's a very common going into folklore, you have like the Rumpelstiltskin stuff where they're able to defeat him by naming his true name. You have things like Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea series, where again the power of names is hugely important. It's a very common kind of trope within fantasy and almost science fantasy as well. I know there's an episode of Doctor Who where where they meet Shakespeare, where the kind of the power of names is very important in that. And I really like that Miyazaki kind of takes this and really introduces it in this kind of unique way. And I love the way that you've then tied that into kind of Chihiro's journey of identity, having to rediscover her identity, rediscovering her sense of self.
Yeah, and I think that's almost kind of debased by all the moving parts around her as well. It's really hard for her to find that sense of stability and that kind of understanding when nothing else around her is in a fixed state.
Yeah. And we get to kind of see the power that Yubaba can wield with names by the fact that, when Haku takes her to see her parents and she nearly forgets her name and he, you have to remember it because I can't remember mine. Like I'm unable to be my original self because I don't know who I am. And that's kind of one of the ways that Yubaba wields her power as the kind of the head honcho of this bathhouse. And yeah, I just think it's a really kind of it's a very classical folklore and fantasy trope, and I love the way that Miyazaki uses it here. We talked about a lot of the River Spirit stuff, but we have to touch on No Face. I adore No Face. It's such a simple design. It's just like this black figure with just this mask, and that's it. Like that's No Face 90% of the time. But it's so striking and iconic in its simplicity that like it's No Face has become like one of the kind of breakout kind of figures from the film. And I miss this is the first time I picked up on there's a one small line. So obviously Chihiro's the one who allows him into the bathhouse, and as you say, he was acting almost like a guardian angel when he steals kind of those bath tags and stuff. And then he sees everyone kind of fawning over the gold that the river spirit leaves, so he starts doing that. And then he eats a couple of people in there as well, but he just wants kind of Chihiro to come and talk to him. And when she finally does, but doesn't have time for him because she's dealing with everything with Haku, there's this one line of him being lonely, and I never picked it up before. But it's like that's kind of why he was so drawn to her. He was out there, ignored by everyone, and she was the first one to kind of be like, come out of the rain. Like essentially the first person to show him kindness at any point.
Yeah. I found this character endearing, and I know that he's become kind of like a staple of the film. What is it about the character that has, or do you think that has made it such a kind of icon of Spirited Away? Because I know he's become a bit of a cultural icon.
Yeah, I think, as you say, there's definitely a level of endearingness there that draws people in. But I think it's such a striking design. It's so simple, but so memorable. Like I think it's all in the design. And I think, as I say, I think he kind of represents the way that the bathhouse corrupts people. Like it corrupts him, and Chihiro is able to kind of save him from this and bring him back to himself. And when he's not gorging on greed and eating people and all the food he can. One of the most relatable gifs ever used on Twitter is him stuffing his face with all the food.
Yeah.
And yeah, when he's not in that, and he's in his original form, he is this kind of meek figure that I mean, who is kind of very willing to just kind of follow Chihiro around as she's the only one who's been nice to him at any point. He's just lovable.
Yeah, no, I can understand that, and even as far as like his voice is very like, yeah. It's going to be a weird part of the episode. But yeah, like it is the simplicity of being kind, and I do understand, like when you describe him like that, there is a bit of this sort of serenity about how effortlessly he gives to Chihiro, and you know that comes with the voice, and it comes with the movement, and it comes with his relationship to Chihiro, and you see the pain when he is corrupted by the bathhouse. And so yeah, I can understand that kind of embodiment of, you know, being effortlessly gentle. I guess there's this lightness to it, isn't there? And to his character.
Yeah, and when you couple that with, again, the design is chef's kiss. Yeah, and I think, you know, it's just so sad for him, really, where he's just trying to get, as she's called at that point, Sen's attention, and you know she's just so focused with the fact that she's just seen, you know, Haku at this point gets injured by this kind of flock of paper birds, and she's so focused on finding him and dealing with that she just keeps like shrugging him off and being like, I don't have time for you. I've got other stuff to deal with. And you can just see, yeah, with like all the corrupting influence of the bathhouse, where he's like, where he's become so greedy, he's like, I deserve all your attention, that he completely loses it. And yeah, I think there's kind of a sadness in that, and then the whole lonely line, which just, yeah, as I say, I missed every other time. I don't know, maybe that's not in, this is like only the first or second time I've ever seen like the English dub. Well, actually, the first couple of times I've seen it, it would have been like English dub, but this is the first time in years I've seen the English dub because I was taking notes. So yeah, maybe it's in there, maybe it's not in the original Japanese. I'm not sure, because I'll get into a bit more on like that whole thing later. But yeah, I think it's. I think yeah, he's just everything adds up to make him so iconic.
Okay, yeah. When you put it like that, and now that I've kind of taken some time to look at it in those terms, I think he is just incredibly lovable.
Yeah. We find out who is the one who's been hurting Haku, and it's Yababa's twin sister Zeniba, who just looks identical. You can't tell them apart. Even though she like rebukes Bo, the baby, like, you can't tell me apart from your mother. It's like, no one can. You are identical.
Yeah.
Although when we meet her again later, we do like there are some pretty big personality differences, but that's not entirely clear at this point. Where, you know, she's kind of seen as this powerful and also cruel witch, much like Yubaba. And again, going back to the greed thing, Haku's kind of stolen this seal, this cursed seal, from Zeniba, and again, yeah, it's and she accuses him of, you know, he's only there to steal from Yubaba. You know, it's everything comes back to this idea of greed, and Chihiro's the one who's not, and you know, she breaks the kind of curse that's on Haku because of this kind of really pure of heart that she is. You know, she loves him because, and yeah, it just all comes back to that kind of Chihiro's the one who cuts through the greed of this place and slowly wins everyone over.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of reiteration, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, I think you see it, she almost kind of works her way up to the top and ultimately ends up kind of softening up the big boss.
But like even Yubaba, Yubaba's like the only one who doesn't really come round on her, like, because she is the one who is at the center of all the greed. I think like she's the only one who Chihiro doesn't win over. But like the baby and the like the bird, I love that moment where they go to Zeniba's and she tells them, "Oh, the spell on those two wore off ages ago. They could have changed back any time they want." And you're like, they just like being in this form and can be closer to Chihiro and spend more time with her. So, as well as helping No Face, Chihiro helps Haku. Both of them with this kind of dumpling that she got from the river spirit, which is something, you know, it makes people throw up. So she gets the seal that Haku's stolen from Zeniba out, as well as this kind of little worm thing that we later learn Yubaba put in to help control Haku. And again, she's here to help her parents, but she's like, I need to return this to Zeniba. It's the right thing to do. And again, it goes back to what you were saying about, you know, she keeps getting sidetracked by her desire to help people. And it's even in little moments where, like, okay, she needs to go return this seal, but first she has to go help No Face. It's like,
yeah,
she's getting distracted from the distraction because she so needs to help people.
Which I think is, you know, in itself is a real depiction of how she grows, because the whole film starts off with her, you know, they're moving and she is feeling sorry for herself.
Yeah.
You know, she's scared, she's protective of herself. You know, it's not just about her bravery, you know, and it's not just that she was scared at the beginning, but, you know, she was very self-protective and she was not selfless in the way that she was by the end of the film.
I think that's a great point. I love that, yeah, where she's, you know, in the car, she's very focused on, like, oh, I got this bouquet, it's about me, like, protecting my stuff. And yeah, I agree. And yeah, she, by the end of it, very selfless, not just the more courageous, but yeah, she just grows into being this amazing person. So she ends up with, like, almost, again, like, kind of Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland. She basically collects this group to come with her. So she's collected No Face, Bo in mouse form, the bird in this little tiny bird form. Before they go, there's that little great moment where she's squashed the slug thing, and you get the baby in mouse form is with all the soot spirits. Who's like mimicking them. It's like, yeah, it's so cute again.
Yeah,
they're great, just little bits of comic relief. Those two, I love them. And they get the train out. The train's like something that's been well set up through the film. Again, just great kind of foreshadowing a lot of the time. And Yubaba has these kind of train tickets, but it's one way, so she doesn't have necessarily a way to get back in time to save her parents, but she still goes because it's the right thing. And there's just that shot on the train with the mouse and the bird on her shoulder and No Face next to her. That's, like, honestly the iconic shot. You must have seen that before, right?
Oh yeah,
it's just so iconic. And they get to Swamp Bottom and meet Zeniba, and she's just delightful. Just a lovely maternal, grandmotherly figure.
Yeah, and she even says,
"Call me Granny."
Call me Granny. Yeah.
They make her the little hairband that she can wear, which is will protect her because it's, you know, been made by the threads, created by her friends. You know, again, this kind of collecting of friends who all come together to help her. She offers No Face, you know, you can stay here. Like, again, it's another person who's, like, welcoming No Face in and accepting him for the first time. What a day he had. And kind of as they get everything all settled, Haku shows up healed and is able to take her back in dragon form, and this is where we learn all about the Kotaku River. This sparks kind of the memory of her in the river where she nearly drowned, and Haku, as the spirit, saved her. And we get back. He's also negotiated this kind of final, you know, if I go get your baby back, will you let Chihiro and her family go? And Yubaba does it on one condition, which is this test. And the test is to identify her parents from this group of pigs. The thing I love about this is everyone kind of watching in the background and all like cheering when she correctly identifies that they're not there. And again, it's like, you know, there's the ones who she's directly interacted with, obviously like Lin and Kamaji and stuff. But it's everyone is there and is rooting for her because she's had such a positive impact on this place. And also I like how self-assured she is in this moment where she's like, but there must be some kind of mistake, my parents aren't here. Whereas, you know, Chihiro at the start of the film would have been like terrified and kind of paralysis of, oh my god, I have to choose, but I don't recognise any of these. You know, she's so kind of just self-assured in this moment as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And she's free to leave. She can head back across the river where she finds her parents. And I just love that kind of last line where they, you know, where they kind of accept, you know, here's your little bit of growth for the parents, where they're like, yeah, we understand you might be scared, like new house, new school, all of this. Like, yeah, okay, it's natural you might be scared. And she just replies that she can handle it.
Yeah, I suppose there's a tiny little bit of growth there. I saw that more as, again, the parents giving Chihiro the opportunity to sort of demonstrate her personal position.
Yeah, you're probably right.
You know, it's there to prop up her. But yeah, I thought it was kind of a really nice little way to round it off.
Yeah.
To sort of bring it back to something so simple, and something that is, you know, we'd seen at the beginning, and just to kind of bring it full circle.
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to quickly rattle through some post-production before we get into final thoughts, because I've got a little bit here.
Yeah.
So, firstly, the English adaptation of this film, essentially the English dub. So, John Lasseter of Pixar was a friend of Miyazaki's, and would, you know, when he was having story problems with his own stuff, he would often watch Miyazaki's work. He obviously loves Spirited Away, because everyone loves Spirited Away. Kind of when they heard about this, Disney CEO Michael Eisner kind of asked if he'd be interested in leading the English dub. And one of the things that they did was change the dialogue slightly to match the original kind of language, the Japanese language lip movements. So it's not an exact one-for-one translation.
Right.
I imagine any changes they did, Miyazaki would have to approve, because he's that kind of person. There's a classic story, and this is great because it involves terrible human being Harvey Weinstein getting his comeuppance.
Lovely.
Where he wanted to, you know, make some cuts on one of Miyazaki's films, and Miyazaki literally sends him a sword with just a note that says no cuts.
Brilliant.
So the issue of the English language release was that essentially there was very little advertising, and it wasn't really supported by Disney at all, because Studio Ghibli, obviously, they were just like, we're holding on to all the merchandising rights. You're not getting any of that. And obviously Disney, a lot of their money comes through the selling of toys and merchandise. Like, as much as any film, like, that's where they make their money. So they just saw no sense in really supporting it.
It's a shame.
Yeah. So in terms of box office performance, this broke records at the Japanese box office. It spent 16 weeks at number one in the Japanese box office, not consecutively, but it did for a long time and then came back. It became the highest grossing film in Japanese history back in 2001, a record that stood until last year, where it was actually beaten by a film called Demon Slayer. I'm going to mess this up, again, pronunciation. Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaiba, the movie Mugen Train, which is a mouthful. Weirdly, a film I went to see yesterday. It's, as I say, Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaiba is this show I just watched, and I watched it because the film came out and performed very well. That is actually the highest grossing film of 2020 in the world.
Wow.
Probably largely because most of its Western release was also in 2021, so it was able to get that box office bump.
Yeah.
But Spirited Away also set a record for actual number of people attending. Weirdly, that surpassed Titanic, which is not the one I would have guessed would be a huge draw for Japanese audiences, but there you go. Anyway, so this was the first film in history to gross more than 200 million at the box office, which did not include the US.
Wow.
Yeah. Obviously, that's something that's changed with kind of the growth of the Chinese market that is now very dominant. As I said, the English dub of the film did not perform very well due to the lack of marketing and support. Spirited Away finally got a release in China in 2019. It had not happened for so long because of long-standing political tensions between the countries, but it was very successful there. It ended up grossing 70 million, and it actually beat out Toy Story 4 in release there.
Nice.
Yeah. So its final box office figures is $383.5 million, which, as I say, for a Japanese film, was unheard of until last year.
Yeah.
It also received huge critical acclaim. Just beloved by audiences completely. It was it's often included in best of lists of all time for, stuff like animated films or world cinema. I know a lot of people have it number one animated film of all time, stuff like that. It because its American release wasn't until a couple of years later. It was nominated for the 2003. So it got an American release in 2002, and it was nominated for the 2003 Oscars, where it won Best Animated Feature Film, beating out Ice Age, Lilo and Stitch, Treasure Planet, and Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron, which I think has a sequel coming out this year, and also won just a ton of other awards. The weird thing that I didn't know was happening, and I just learnt from research here, is there is a stage show currently being produced. It was announced in February of this year, and a world premiere is planned next year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where's that being done?
I know that the premiere is going to be in Tokyo, but I don't know if it's necessarily just a purely Japanese production, because I think some of the people working on it are like English and Western as well. So I assume it's going to be a tour, maybe? I'm not sure.
Amazing.
So yeah, that's kind of all I have to say on Spirited Away. Hugely successful film, both critically and commercially. Hugely beloved film. It is regarded as one of the greatest films ever made, including by yours truly. What were your kind of first thoughts on seeing the film for the first time?
I really, again, as I said at the beginning, I really enjoyed the artistry of it. That was something that stood out to me the whole way. There were sequences that I absolutely loved, that I could really appreciate in all its glory. I definitely think it's worth a second watch, because I think that there are layers to it that can't necessarily be absorbed first time round, especially because it is a mad film. So I think, it earns itself a second watch, and you kind of, it deserves another look. But yeah, really interesting to watch something a little bit different. As I said, I haven't, since Pokemon, I haven't really seen any anime stuff. So it was really nice to kind of watch something that I wouldn't ordinarily reach for. And really enjoyed it.
Yeah, for me, this is a genuinely perfect film. I adore every minute of it. I will rewatch it anytime. It introduced me to the world of Studio Ghibli, and they have so many other great films. Princess Mononoke, Howl's Moving Castle, Laputa Castle in the Sky, all of these, My Neighbor Totoro. Ronnie would kill us if we didn't mention that one. Yeah, they're just an incredible studio. Miyazaki is one of the great filmmakers to have ever worked, and I think Spirited Away is like their masterpiece. I adore this film. It's a top 5 film for me, as I've said. Yeah. And Chihiro / Sen, one of my favourite characters ever. But you could throw a bunch others close on that list. No Face is up there for sure.
Yeah.
And so that's it on Spirited Away. What are we doing next week?
Right, so this is my... You let me know before we started recording. This is my last pick of the season.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd go with one of my favourite films.
Okay.
And it is Good Will Hunting.
Oh, yes.
And...
It's so good.
It is just, I mean, thinking about it now, I just get shivers.
Oh, there's going to be tears.
There are going to be so
Williams
many
is going to make
tears.
you cry.
For me, this film is, I mean, I didn't actually watch it for the first time that long ago. It was probably only about 4 or 5 years ago.
Probably
But,
same, to be fair.
yeah, but I was just blown away. And, you know, it is heartbreaking, especially, obviously, the one and only Robin Williams. You know, everything that kind of happened around his death and his death, you know, put this film into a whole different light. That kind of exploration of mental health, and just this, I can't wait to watch it again and talk about it. I love this film.
Yeah, this is going to be great. I can't wait to revisit. I can't wait to discuss it.
Yeah, this is one of my films that I'd take into a bunker with me for the end of the world. Yeah,
a la Blast from the Past.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely love it. So looking forward to seeing it again.
Yeah. And interestingly, so a little closer for this week. You mentioned kind of films touching on mental health and stuff. I want to shout out Bo Burnham just released a new comedy special on Netflix called Inside.
Oh, great.
So he basically created this over the pandemic. He wrote, directed, filmed everything.
Yeah.
It's all shot within his apartment. All done on his own. It is insane. It is incredibly dark. It is also very funny.
Yeah.
It's like weird, abstract, goes meta at times, and yeah, it's something to behold. And I think it straddles that line between, is he a genius or is he having a breakdown? It's probably both.
Right. He is a genius having a breakdown.
Yeah, I think it's genuinely an amazing film. As I say, it's quite dark, and it does touch a lot on kind of mental health issues at times, particularly kind of relating to the pandemic and the isolation we all felt, and that kind of, you know, having to stay indoors. Yeah, it's a wild ride.
Great. Yeah, I'm definitely going to be watching that then. I think, you know, we're coming out of the back end of, or it feels like at the moment that we're coming out of the back end of the pandemic, you know, and it's interesting. I don't know about you. I've experienced a bit of anxiety about, you know, the world opening up again. I live in London. Traveling is not always the most comfortable experience at the best of times, let alone when you're kind of almost pretty much on high alert most of the time for somebody not wearing a mask or whatever. There seems to be a real divide in some areas, not of London necessarily, not geographically, but, you know, I think socially there's quite a divide between people who are almost kind of disregarding the sort of safeguarding requirements or suggestions, and the other people who are, you know, trying to stick to it as best as possible. So it's an interesting time. I don't know how you felt with sort of everything opening up again.
Yeah,
exciting, slightly surreal,
and slightly anxiety-inducing as well.
Yeah,
I'll feel a bit more comfortable when I'm able to get a vaccine, which shouldn't be too long for us. We should be the next age group, I think.
Yeah, so I think we're on our way.
Yeah, so there's kind of your recommendation for the week. Bo Burnham's Inside. Hopefully it will help you deal with some of these feelings. I know that the ending of the show very directly addresses what you've just been talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I won't spoil any more than that. And that's all we've got for this week. You can find us on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, YouTube, kind of wherever you get your podcasts. If we're not somewhere, let us know. We'll try and sort that out. You can follow us at Nostalgia Bubble on Twitter, at Nostalgia Bubble Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. You can follow me at Shuggie Says everywhere on the internet that matters.
You can follow me on Twitter at Nyrees, which is Nyerrees, or on Instagram at ReeseNye.
And we'll see you next time for Good Will Hunting. Bye-bye.
See ya.